I've been looking to improve my HF performance on the upper bands, as I've only got an off-centre fed dipole at the moment. So I've been looking around for what antenna options we have, and one of the antennas that sticks out is a Hexbeam. The Hexbeam seems to be getting some pretty good reviews, and it covers everything from 20 meters right through to 6 meters, all in a single antenna with a single feed line, and it is a beam. So after a bit of research, I've decided that I'm going to get a Hexbeam. So this little series of videos is there to document the Hexbeam project, how to get the Hexbeam up on the roof. So for starters, I've been looking around for Hexbeam, and this particular one is from America. It's from K4 I from Leo Schumacher. It's called the KIO Hexbeam. Now this Hexbeam is being sold all over the world, but with current transport costs was a little bit prohibitive to get one into the country. So I was lucky enough to pick up a second-hand one from another amateur in Australia, and that package which I received also includes a rotator, the rotator and the rotator controller. It's only a manual rotator controller, but the rotator is a KR400, and the Hexbeam is about 3 years old. So in a little series of videos, I'm going to document the Hexbeam assembly and all the details and ins and outs of that Hexbeam, and hopefully afterwards the performance of the Hexbeam as well. So without further ado, let's have a quick look at the Hexbeam. Here are some of the features of the KIO Hexbeam. Particularly good that it promises a low SWR, and there's no tuning required, whilst it and it doesn't have to go up to great heights, which is a necessity for me, as I haven't really got a tower. I can only just put it on the roof. The capability of 2 kilowatts, well, that's a little bit much for what I do here. I operate at 100 watts or preferably lower, most of the time 50 watts or below on the digital modes. The small footprint, it talks about an 11-foot turning radius. Yeah, I think it's about 6 meters in diameter. Looks like an upside down umbrella, which is good, but yeah, it's not going to be a great enhancement to the look of the house. But I've already got that many antennas up on the roof. One more doesn't really matter, and it is fairly light as well, so that's really good. Anyway, so that's the antenna. I've purchased it. It has arrived, and it is in a box, and in the next one of the next videos we'll get to have a look at the actual antenna components themselves. So before we can even consider getting the Hexbeam up on the roof, I need to install a rotator, because the Hexbeam will sit on top of that. Here's the rotator that has arrived with my Hexbeam. That particular rotator is a Ken Pro, a KR400 rotator, and there's a controller, as you can see right next to it. Controller is very simple. Got a display, an on-off button, and a left and right button to actually move the rotator. Now that rotator looks in quite good condition from the outside. However, it doesn't look new, so I don't know the history of it. So my first thought was, what are we going to do with that rotator before it goes up on the roof? I would hate for it to be up on the roof and then to have a rotator failure of some sort, because that would mean everything would have to come down, the hex beam and everything, and then I would have to work on the rotator. So before getting into that, I thought the rotator needs to be serviced. Obviously the rotator has got some bearings. I gave some thought to disassembling the rotator myself and looking at the bearings, at least greasing up the bearings, and in my search around the internet to see how to do that, I've come across a company by the name of Duoro Services in Sydney, run by Peter Hastings. Now, after watching Peter Hastings' videos on YouTube, I was convinced that there's a bit more to overhauling a rotator than to just grease the bearings. So I decided that rotator is probably best sent off to an expert for an overhaul, because there's a lot more to it than what meets the eye. So I looked up Peter Hastings' website and found a lot of details on there, a lot of information about rotators. Gave Peter a ring and asked if he can overhaul my rotator, and he said yes, that would be a great job. So I sent the rotator to him. Now, Peter actually made a great video about the overhaul of this particular rotator that I sent to him. If you're interested in what's inside a rotator and how it gets overhauled, I will link that video in the comment section down below, so feel free to watch that. Anyway, the rotator has arrived. I have now got it here. So I've opened up the package, and we're now going to unpack and see what we've received back from Peter. So what we've got is a bracket. That's one of the original Yaesu brackets, a brand new one. That is the potentiometer. So that's the original potentiometer that has come out of my rotator before, which Peter has replaced for me with a brand new one. I'm going to keep that, hang on to that as a spare, just in case. Then we have got all of the bolts that we need. Another bag of bolts. Here, that's the connector. That's the new type of connector that goes in. And here is our rotator. So that's the rotator that has been overhauled. Let's get that out. It's upside down. So here we go. That's the rotator. There's the new plug that Peter has fitted, which will fit that connector here, and that I need to fit that off. Right, another thing that is a part of this first job is the rotator controller. So that rotator controller will now have to be, it's the original rotator controller. It'll have to be modified. It's still got the original connections on the back, so that'll have to be modified because of the starting capacitor. I'll explain that a bit later. And then, of course, we've also got some cable. That's the cable here, 30 meters of cable, which is a numbered 7-core cable of 0.75 square millimeter cable. So there we go. that's the equipment that I'm going to get to work on now. So one of the first things to do is to disconnect our capacitor that's inside. So for that I will take this apart and I will just demonstrate how to do that, and then I've actually already done it, so but I want to make sure that everyone can actually see what's being done. So here we go. There's all of the legs off. Now the housing pulls apart like so. And pulls off like this. Now on this one I've already done the disconnect of the capacitor, so if we have a look inside, you can clearly see these wires used to be connected to that leg of the capacitor. These wires used to be connected to that leg of the capacitor. The reason why we had to change it is because when Peter fits does the overhaul of the rotator, he puts a motor start capacitor into the rotator, which is where it should be. Now you can clearly see there's a motor start capacitor in here because the original rotator head doesn't have a capacitor built in. But now that we've got it overhauled, we no longer need that capacitor in here. I'll leave it in here just in case, but at this stage it's disconnected, so now it's just a matter of putting the controller back together and on to the next step. So here we are, ready to fit the plug. And this is the plug that is provided as part of the rotator upgrade. It's an Amphenol LTW plug with 7 pins. And of course, as with all of Peter's work, he provides very detailed instructions, which include how to pull the plug apart. It also includes how much to strip off the wire and everything else. So this is great detail that is provided there. So let's go ahead and let's strip the cable. Here we go. Try and not cut into the core that's in it. This is an unshielded cable. And here we go, we've got the cores exposed. So we have got 2, an earth, another 2 and another 2. So there's 6 core plus earth. That's our cores. And let's have a look here. It tells us what goes where. There's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. So there we go. Now all we need to do is cut them to length and fit them off. So we are at the next stage. Pulled the plug apart, and this is the sort of detail that Peter's going through. See that little white mark? That marks pin number 1 on here and on here. So you can't possibly go wrong. And you can see he's also put that mark on the drawing here to indicate pin 1. So he makes sure that we can't get this wrong. Anyway, the bits go together. I've already pre-tinned. I've stripped insulation back and tinned the cable. So what goes onto that cable now is that part here, and this is the rubber that squeezes down on it. So that goes on here, and there's a seal, and that seal goes in here as well. Right, and that sits in the back here. So now we're ready to solder. So I've already pre-tinned the plug because there's a fair bit of solder that goes into it, and here we go. So let's do pin number 1. Make sure it is pin number 1. Yes. Heat that up, and there we go. Pin number 1 goes in and sits in there very nicely. So that's the first pin done. Now going to go through, and I'm going to do all 7 of them. So here we go. Plug is now soldered. We've got all the connections on. The plug allows for a very generous wire size. If you need to put a fairly big wire in, the 0.75 was very, very easy to fit in there. So now we put the plug back together, and here it goes. Number 1, that's on, and then number 2, nut goes on here. I'll tighten that up later on to make sure it is nice and tight, and it actually seals the cable properly. So there's our plug ready terminated now. So here is the other end of the rotator cable, and bear in mind I've got the whole 30 meters, which is the final length that I'm using, so that I've got all the wire in there. So we're going to strip those back, and I'm going to tin them. Now this is a temporary setup, because we are not this is not really the final rotator controller that it goes onto. But what we're trying to achieve today is just to get to actually run the rotator and test it, and make sure everything is working and this is correct. So no doubt everything will be, because Peter has already run it on his workbench. But yeah, we just need to replicate that. So we've got a working model. So I'm going to give these wires a bit of solder, so they're tinned up, and then we'll connect them. So here we are, ready to connect the wires on the back of the controller. Yeah, because of the way Peter has wired it all up, this should be a simple matter of connecting number 1 to number 1 and number 2 to number 2 and so forth. So here's wire number 1. We'll connect that in, and then we go on to wire number 2, and of course we won't need wire number 7, because wire number 7 is something which Peter has added on, so there's no need for that. Just got to pick wire number 2, which is this wire here. Get that in here. So now we've got all the wires connected, it is time to try the rotator. So here's the rotator and the nice new connector. A lot better than the old terminals that used to be on there. So here we go. We put the plug in, and if I get it straight, I'll put the plug in and tighten it up. There we go. Okay, so that plug is now connected. The rotator is here, and it is time to flick the power switch. So let's stand back, and here we go. You also need to see, of course,
what the display is doing. So as you can see, that display is already showing north, so it's already moved. Yeah, I'll just move that over here a little bit, and we can see there's a mark here. Yes, there's the mark. There's a mark here that says north, and it is showing north or thereabouts. And that's the mark here. So let's see what happens when we press the button. There we go. Turning to the right, which is towards the south, which is good. Other way. Yeah. Turning back to the north. Beautiful. So I would say that's pretty successful. The only thing we've got is the display that says north is not quite on north when the rotator is on north. So let's do a bit of an adjustment here, and there's an adjustment on the back of the rotator. I'll just get a little screwdriver, plug that in, and see if we can make that calibrate to north, and that looks pretty good. So we've got pretty much exactly north now. So the display is now calibrated, and we can now run the rotator, and let's give it a run all the way to south in this direction. Very nice work there by Peter. West, so that's right. It's about 90 degrees that it's turned. And now we're coming around to the south position. And there we go. Yep, there's a little mark there. Yep, and it's shut off, which means it's right there on the south position. So there's the mark here that says we are in the southern position. And let's go back and try going the other way. You can see the display moving. And there we go, it stops again, and it's about, yep, it's just run a little tad over south, hence the display is a little bit over there. There you go, that's about south there. So here we go. That's looking pretty good. I think it's working. We can call that one a success, and this is our first step towards getting a Hexbeam up in the air and working.
Thank you for watching part 1.